Okay, we're going to finish the chapter 4 material, and we're going to talk about how to name binary compounds. So remember, we're talking about covalently bonded compounds, and the electrons are shared in the bonds, but what does binary stand for? That stands for a compound that contains two elements. So you're going to learn how to write the formula, and then also how to write the name for compounds that contain two elements, like you see down here below. All these formulas only have two different elements, and you will not have to name compounds with more than two elements. So first off, how do you write the formula? The formula is going to contain only the symbols for elements. Okay, you're not going to write out the full element name. It'll be the symbol off the periodic table. And the way you order it is you're going to write the least electronegative element first. Typically in covalently bonded molecules, you have two nonmetals, but we're not just necessarily talking about covalently bonded molecules here. We can have metals or nonmetals. We're just talking about binary compounds in general. So metals before nonmetals, and then you're going to write any if you have a compound that's fully covalent and you have two nonmetals and you're trying to decide, okay, two nonmetals, which one do I write first or second? It's going to be the nonmetal further left. So, for example, elements in main groups like main groups 4 or 5, further left on the periodic table. Hydrogen would be included in that as well because it's a nonmetal. Before elements further right. So that would be, for example, the elements in main group 6 or 7. So these would be written last, and these would be written first. Okay. So that's how you'll order them, and then you also need to include a subscript that tells you, it's a number that tells you how many of that atoms of that element are in the formula. So for example, TiCl4, okay? This 4 tells me the number of chlorines, all right? And then remember, if you only see the elemental symbol, there's just one of that atom. So we come over here, example again. We have boron and chlorine. We have one boron, okay, and then we have 3 chlorines. So these subscripts, so we don't have to write the 1. It's just an understood 1 if it's there. You don't have to write that in. But the subscripts tell you how many of that atom are in the formula. So that's how you're going to write it. Examples, like I mentioned here, we have, I meant to erase, we have 2 nonmetals for N nitrogen dioxide. And because these are both nonmetals, nitrogen is further left and oxygen is further right. And so that's why we wrote nitrogen first, oxygen second. Okay? And then if you're looking at sulfur and oxygen, they're both in main group 6, okay? Both of these. Sulfur and oxygen are main group 6, so how do you know to write sulfur first, oxygen second? Well, that goes up to the first part right here. Sulfur is less electronegative than oxygen. It's further away from fluorine. So that's why we write sulfur first, oxygen second, okay? So remember, always write the least electronegative element first, the more electronegative element second. All right, so that's formulas in a nutshell. Now we're going to talk about how to name binary compounds, and this involves writing out the full elemental name. And we are going to use prefixes, but we're not going to use prefixes in the same sense that you recognize them or know them from chapter 1. We're not talking about kilo, centi, milli, micro, things like that. We are talking about a new set of prefixes that are just going to denote numbers like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, up to 10 to tell us how many atoms of that particular element, again, are in the compound, but we're looking at it from the standpoint of the name, not the formula, okay? So again, names here involve writing out the full name of the element. So rule number 1, you're going to write the first element in the formula, and you're going to include the prefix with that element name for the number of atoms. And a prefix is a word that comes first. So the way this is set up so far is you're going to write the prefix, and then you're going to write the first element, and it's the full name, okay? And the prefix is going to be one of these: mono, di, tri, tetra, penta, hexa, so on and so forth, okay? Depending on how many of that element you have. And each of these prefixes, you can see how it corresponds to the number of atoms for that element in the formula or in the name. Okay, then second, you're going to write the second element in the formula, and you're going to replace the ending with IDE. That sounds familiar, right? That's how we named anions. Okay, so, and then you're also going to be writing, it's not written in here, but you should also be writing the prefix for that as well. So, sorry I don't have that written or typed out, but you're going to write the prefix, and then you're also going to write the second element name. Okay, so rule number 3 before you move on, the prefix mono is omitted unless it's being used to distinguish between compounds with the same element, such as carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide. So typically you don't use mono, okay? And especially if you are naming the first element, you don't use mono. Okay, an example of not using mono right here, front and center. Sulfur with 3 oxygens. You only have 1 sulfur. We are not going to say monosulfur trioxide. We're just going to say sulfur, so omit the mono. And then the tri here is the prefix. And the ox, and notice that the name ending is IDE. So sulfur, 1 sulfur, and then because there's 3 oxygens, the prefix for 3 is tri. So that's going to become before the second element name, so sulfur tri, and then you would say oxygen, but remember you have to change the name ending to IDE, so that's why it's sulfur trioxide. Okay, the next one, we have 1 nitrogen, so we're going to omit mono, just write nitrogen, and then we have 2 oxygens. The prefix for 2 is di. Okay, so we're going to say nitrogen and then di, and name the second element was oxygen, but change the name ending again to IDE, and again you have dioxide, so nitrogen dioxide. TiCl4, we saw this earlier. This is titanium, and then 4, the prefix for 4 is tetra. So we're going to write the prefix first, and then tetrachlor, and again, change the name ending to I, tetrachloride, titanium tetrachloride. Okay? So I'm going to launch my poll question, I did have a poll question for this, and I think it had to do with these written down here. But let's just go through and name a couple of these. So I like this example right here because you have on your first elemental, or the first element you're going to write out, you actually have a prefix you need to include this time. It's not mono because we have 2, and so the prefix for 2 nitrogens here, is di. Okay, right there. So we're going to say dinitrogen. You don't omit it. You write the di this time. Dinitrogen. And then what is the prefix for 5? Because we have 5 oxygens, and that's second. So go get the prefix for 5. That's penta. So dinitrogen. Now, there's a thing with the English language, we're not putting these 2 vowels together. Whenever you have your second elemental name, so oxygen, whenever the prefix ends with a vowel and the second elemental name starts with a vowel, A and O, we're going to omit the A here on penta. Okay? It's kind of a weird thing. It's more of an English thing than it is a chemistry thing. But we'll just call it pentoxide. Remember to change the name ending to IDE. So omit the A, because we don't have to have those 2 vowels next to each other. So dinitrogen pentoxide, not pentaoxide. All right, and then we have Br3. So B is boron. If you need a periodic table, use one by all means to help you here. We just have 1 boron. So the prefix would be mono, but remember you omit mono. So we're just going to say boron. And then we have 3 bromines. So tri is the prefix for 3 if you look at our list up here. Tri, and then we're going to name bromine, but instead of bromine, we're going to say bromide. Boron tribromide. Okay? What would this one over here be? SF6. Well, it would be sulfur. Remember, you omit the mono. So we're not going to say monosulfur, just sulfur. And then what is the prefix for 6? If you go look at the list. hexa, hexafluoride. Okay? So there's several more you can practice right down here. I'm just going to do this one right here as an example, and then I'm going to be done. You can practice the others on your own. So we've got P, which if you're looking at a periodic table, P is phosphorus. And we need to write the prefix for phosphorus. It's not 1. We have 4 phosphorus atoms in this formula. So we need to write the prefix, and the prefix for 4 is tetra. Tetraphosphorus. And then we need the prefix for 8, which is octa. And we're going to name the second element, which is oxygen. But remember, we don't want those two vowels together, so we're just going to take off the A. So it would be octoxide, IDE. That's a very weird word, octoxide. It's hard to say. Tetraphosphorus octoxide. And there you go. So practice naming these other ones. If you have questions about them, feel free to reach out. And there will be some more from the back of Chapter 4 textbook, some problems that I assigned for good practice on this stuff. But with that, that concludes Chapter 4.